Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to this year's virtual conference about making data good for society, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Julian Schwarzenbach. I'm chair of the BCS Data Management Specialist Group, and this week's session of webinars, this virtual conference, is a joint activity organised by the BCS Data Management Specialist Group and DAMA UK. So just a quick bit about the organisations if you're not familiar with them. The BCS is the professional body for computing, with a mission to promote better, making data better for society, also making IT better for society, which is where we got the theme for the conference from. And the Data Management Specialist Group, we promote better use of data, both by running data-related events to share good practice, but also support the development of data-related standards and guidance. DAMA UK is the go-to organisation for data professionals. Their mission is to nurture a community of data professionals in the UK who champion the value of data management. This is one of a number of webinars this week. We've been running them, so they're 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock each day. What you should be seeing on the screen at the moment is the visual agenda for the event. So the red, the left-hand side, was where we started on Monday with the National Data Strategy, and then NHS Dudley Group talking about how they reacted to the pandemic. Yesterday, we had the Open Data Institute and the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team talking about how they were using mapping and spatial views of delivering better value. Today, we've got Karen Alford this morning doing Environment Agency, and this afternoon, Mark Enzer from the Centre for Digital Built Britain. Then tomorrow, we've got data ethics and the National Physical Laboratory talking about data science in various guises. Friday morning is also going to be around data science, but this is actually about the social sector. And then we're finally going to end with a panel debate on Friday afternoon. We're also, if I can get the slide to advance for me. Throughout the conference, the BCS Bookshop, they're offering some extra discounts. So there's a 30% discount on list prices for various data-related titles. It's valid for the duration of the conference, so you need to be fairly quick on that one. So it's valid from the 13th to the 19th of June. Those are some of the titles there. One at the bottom I recognise because I wrote it. But the link there is shop.bcs.org. So if you're struggling to find it, you can Google it anyway. But the discount is available for the rest of this week. So finally, just a little bit of housekeeping. The event's being recorded today. We're going to be posting it on the BCS member group's YouTube channel, and then DAMA UK will also be posting it on their website when we've done all the processing. Journalism are doing a visual record of the event, so they did the visual agenda you're looking at the moment, but they're also going to be, in effect, doing a visual record of both the presentation and the Q&A. So we're going to cut through to Matt, who's doing the drawing for this session, partway through, so you'll be able to see that. We're going to be sharing these with people after the event. You're all muted, so if you've got questions, and we'd love to get questions from you to pose to Karen when we get to the Q&A session, if you can use the chat feature to record your questions, then I will ask them on your behalf when we get through to that point in the session. We've allowed about 20 minutes for questions, so there should be plenty of time to pose any questions and to actually discuss some of the issues that or the topics that have been raised during the presentation. So over to our presentation today. We've got Karen Alford with us. She leads the Environment Agency's whole lifecycle asset management digital transformation and works within the Asset Management Directorate. And so they're leading the integration of data management within project delivery, using the capability as a foundation for shaping the digital technology approach within the UK government's asset management business. I've been working with Karen for a number of years now in some standards related work. So Karen is involved in a number of cross-industry working groups. So there's a list here: the Government Smart Infrastructure Working Group, the Centre for Digital Built Britain, the ISO 19650 Transition Group, the Digital Transformation Task Group. She's the steering member of the Cambridge Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction and BIM for Water. And she's also a committee member on the BSI and standards committees for ISO 19650 and the ISO 55000 standards. So Karen is very well qualified to give us the presentation today. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is hand over to Karen, and she can take you through a little bit more about what the Environment Agency are doing. Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. I'll share. So There we go. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. So as Julian has done a very good job of introducing me. So I think you can see me on the screen. There's a picture of me. So I've probably been in this world, and I will describe our journey in a little while, but for probably about the last 10 years intensively in this area. Prior to that, I'm actually an accountant by trade, but I have always been very much involved in IT and data. So yeah, I formally haven't spent that much time, let's call it sort of doing lots of calculations, but very much about how we can benefit and use data more and IT to deliver the business outcomes. So a little bit about the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency is fundamentally split into two areas. One looks after regulation, and the other is very much more asset management led, particularly looking at environmental assets, as well as the bulk is sort of flood and risk management type assets. So we have, chances are we have an asset near you. As you can see on the map, we have a significant number of assets around the country. Many of those will exist in communities that often people don't even realise they exist. I only heard on the news today about some of the challenges that we have in preparing for climate change. So what has actually happened as a result is our capital programme is increasing and really focusing on how we can build that better, how we can build technology, using technology, and really sort of driving the efficiencies data and technology can bring us. So we have a data strategy, and it's very much our vision is about having the right data at the right time in the right place in a way that we can use it in any form of technology, but also ensure that everyone has confidence in it and there is rigor in that confidence. So I think part of the challenges that we have had in the past and we're trying to eliminate is everyone doing their own thing, and that brings problems when you start looking at how you can digitize a business, how you can streamline, and how you can automate. Now, from an Environment Agency's perspective, even though I reside in the Asset Management Directorate, the asset data, the whole life asset data, is used for a variety of activities, both inside and outside of the organisation. So, obviously we look after asset management, but it also features, it's one of the main inputs for flood modelling, for flood forecasting, contingency planning, helping us understand how we're going to support communities ahead of flooding. But it also contributes to strategic decisions, planning decisions, and even household insurance. And as Glenn reminded me earlier today, when someone buys a house, the data, our data actually contributes to whether they want to buy that house or the flood risk associated with it. So, it's not just used by our own business, it is used extensively outside of our business. And, I think for me, that's, a key point of where our change, when we start looking at how we can do things differently, we have to recognise that our data is just not solely used internally, it is used externally quite heavily. So just to recap, as Julia mentioned, I could have filled probably a whole presentation with the activities that are going on in this world, particularly sort of construction and asset management, but I wanted to pick out a few. It was 10 years ago, the government construction strategy mandated for 6 government departments, one of which was the Environment Agency, that we had to introduce BIM. And at that time, it was almost a philosophy of what wanted to be achieved. And I sometimes think I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong job. But I was given the job of looking at how we can implement the standards and work with government in developing the standards at that time. So it has been a significant journey, and I'm hoping that I will be able to sort of share some of the learnings from that. But what that did, and I think, if we reflect, what has happened in those 10 years by government mandating better use of data, processes for managing data, which are now bound into the ISO 19650, it gave industry right, we've got to do things better. And as a result, many things have driven from it. And there's probably a few that I just wanted to highlight. The data for the public good, which is delivered by the National Infrastructure Commission. And I think what is really quite interesting with this is they were commissioned initially, how can technology be delivered in the industry, in the infrastructure industry for the public good. But they very quickly realized that technology comes and goes, but data stays with the organization, and it stays with decision makers for far longer than the technology that it resides. So what ended up is a report around data for public good, and if you haven't already read it, I would encourage you all to read it. The longer term vision, and you've got Mark Enzer this afternoon talking about the digital twin. It has led to significant developments and investment in the Centre for Digital Built Britain, and a lot of investment with client bodies such as myself and the construction industry. And out of the Centre for Digital Built Britain was how the Gemini principles have been delivered. So again, I encourage you to have a look at that. And yesterday, actually, I came across the infrastructure achieving better outcomes. Now that is it's a white paper, and it's actually been written with input from the UK, but from input from across the world. And I think what we are seeing is really a drive to make this different and deliver data across that whole piece, because an asset is an asset, and in many ways an asset, we were just talking about culverts, which is a particular asset type. A culvert will be the same whether you're talking in England, in Australia, in America. So if we're going to gain benefit from really understanding and creating a better world, we need to have better understanding of those assets and how they can talk to each other. So I think it's worth, why did the government mandate it? And I'm sure people are very much aware of these sort of scenarios, but most organisations really have struggled to having that right information, the right place, right time. And many studies are indicating that at least 20% of staff time is spent finding information, and another 10% putting it right. We actually, working with Building Smart back in 2014, we looked at a project, and we determined that only out of, I think it was 200 gigabytes of data, only 20% of that was digitally readable. In other words, that rest of that data was either in proprietary format or was in a file named Karen 1, which would need to be opened to examine what was its contents. And I think part of what the whole sort of BIM drive and the digital drive within the industry is about ensuring that we do understand what those files contain, so that we don't have 20% of our data digitally available, we have 100%. So we have been on a journey. So it's been a 10-year journey, and I'm going to take you through some of these steps as we go through. We are continuing on that journey, and along this journey we have identified activities that we didn't first predict we would need to be doing. So I think being on a digital journey, digital transformation journey, you can't get it all right, you can't predict, and technology is developing as well as our understanding of what's feasible, which makes it really exciting. So we have delivered a number of components, which I will take you through very shortly, and then we are in the process of delivering some other capability, and that's part of a large project. But I think what is really a sort of takeaway point is that many of these activities that we're delivering stand alone, but when they come together, they then support the digital transformation. So really, if I think about building the basics, so building information management, BIM modelling, actually I should have said, sorry, I had a bit of a error there when I did my slides. It is about buying two assets, the physical asset and the digital asset. So, you know, and that is something that prior to BIM, we really didn't focus on thinking or even considering. It was very anecdotal to the physical construction. And where we are, I think one of the areas that it's very easy to focus on in the sort of digital world is the visualization, you know, getting real value out of the data. But what is often forgotten are those perhaps first three and fourth step about, you know, how do you define, how do you ensure that you're getting data that you can trust? How can you collect it? How can you get it right at source? How can you transform it? How can you build trust in that data? And then how can you store it in a way that it is usable in different IT systems and different technologies, so that we can begin to move to that right-hand side in a way that we know that we have trusted data and information. A little bit of animation there. So one of the first things that we realized is, you know, because, you know, when we started out on this journey, I always had in my vision, right, how are we going to use this in earnest within the business? And it became very obvious that as a client organization, we had to take leadership in some of the standard metadata. But during that process, we also sought the opportunity of aligning to our other business systems. So rather than creating something that was just unique to us, we worked with our projects, we worked with IT systems to you know, look at what we needed to do. But in that process, we also worked with MBS, looking at classification and ensuring that we had full established classification for our assets and our asset data. And you know, when we start thinking about this place of, you know, digital, I think that's, for me, is a very important part. It's much easier to focus on your internal business and thinking, I can do these things. When you start thinking about how you can connect and how you can link to other people, and we can build, you know, a digital built Britain, as an organization, we need to be able to connect to other people. So if we don't get the fundamentals right and we don't align to openly available standards, then actually we're going to be on the back foot right from the beginning. One of the most important tools in the box as a client is the employer's information requirements. And for people that are unfamiliar with it, it's a data and information specification. So we've had one in existence since 2014, and we continue to mature it. So this is where we effectively translate many of our internal standards around data and information. We describe the tools that we use. We describe the ways that we wish our suppliers to work when they're managing our data, and the standards that we wish them to apply, and the training and skills that they need within their team. But we also use this as a way of driving improvements, and you'll see some of the improvements that we have been working on to really sort of drive that data, getting data right at source, automating, etc. So, you know, that is very much, and it's a very useful tool. It is a construction related tool, but I think it's something that, for in many cases, it's a really invaluable process to ensure that when data is managed by a third party, it is in line with your requirements, and it's a sort of in a more formal, easy to understand way. The part of the standards dictated that we had to have an employer's common data environment, and again, we used standards that were at that time emerging, and we worked with the standards groups that were delivering them to ensure that we could actually deliver the intention of those standards. And as you can see in the sort of diagram on the top left, the processes are very much around people owning and managing their own data, but then being able to share that data and then being able to push it to wherever it needs to be in the organizations. But so having common structures, common classifications, common ways of doing things is really key to this. And it is quite challenging to implement this type of approach because you are expecting people to change. But we've been working on this for 7 years, so it has been a gradual process. And I think for me, it's also picking the right time. So being clear about your intention, being clear of the standards that you are working with. We're not creating this, we are working with standards which then make it much easier for those suppliers, working partners working with us to deliver not only to us but to other customers that they might have in the future. So one of the I think what I refer to as a light bulb moment, and when we started this journey, we weren't in the data place whatsoever. We were still fundamentally sharing documents. So we thought we can't jump. It's impossible for us just to jump immediately to data, but we do have documents. So let's look at what we can do with documents. So as part of this process, we captured the sort of common documents that were shared. And when I'm talking documents, it's things like designs, it's like things like topographic surveys, etc. And we identified about 130 different deliverables. And we took the bold step of giving them all a classification code. So each of those have a classification code. And as they are procured, each of them has a unique identifier, which carries some of the carries the referencing, the classification referencing. So it allows us then to source and find, but it also gives a sort of structure. And we've developed a template approach, which is, as we've developed it over time, it has now become quite automated, that allows project teams to procure data, share data with the suppliers, but it also, we've embedded the metadata management behind it. So it fundamentally adds most of the metadata because we've worked out how we can do that. So it takes out some of the mundane aspects. So provided project teams and asset teams are identifying the what, we can fundamentally manage a lot of the metadata that we need behind the scenes, which is quite key. Again, thinking about open formats, we use what is called COBE, which is Construction Operating Building Information Exchange. And this is an open way of sharing data, asset related data, but it is a spreadsheet. And I know I'm not hearing it quite as much these days, but for a long while it was just, well, it's just a spreadsheet. But it's once described to me as it's a suitcase. It's a well-packed suitcase. And what you need to do is understand where the compartments are in that suitcase and make sure that the data can be mapped to that suitcase so that when you get to the other end, it can be unpacked and it still contains its meaning. And we have continued to develop and align So again, we're not changing the structure of the format. We are just aligning and making sure that our data can fit and we know where it needs to be fitted in the suitcase. So if I now move on to some of the other aspects of really thinking about how we can maximize benefit of our data. So, like many businesses, we have a lot of data. But what we found is that we weren't perhaps managing it well. We weren't managing it in a way that we could build trust with people using that data. So we embarked on some activities to think about how the data was managed. So things like ensuring that data was updated on a nightly basis. And it sounds quite basic, but it wasn't happening. It was much more ad hoc. So of course, people were using the data to pull, to find information. It was giving them slightly different version of the truth. So we've looked at, how we can sort of eradicate those types of activities. We apply the open data protocol so that if a member of staff happens to go to our internal GIS platform, which happens to be called EasyMap, they pull off data, we have the security that we're only sharing data on that platform, which is openly available. We have also been linking up technologies. So I talked about the common data environment, which is with a company called Asite, but we've been able to link the URL through an API to the EasyMap. So teams can actually just go to the location, click on the link and actually open the associated document. And that's been very much sort of part of my philosophy is, we've got that data. We don't want it just locked in systems. We want to make sure that it's available and it's there for whoever needs it. So one of the big challenges that we have as a business, as you can appreciate, are things like parliamentary questions. And parliamentary questions often come in during a significant flood event. And sometimes we found these quite challenging to answer. So we embarked on developing dashboards that would give very quick and easy access to data and information, both at a local area level as well as a joined up national level. So it does provide some infographics as well, which is often very welcome by ministers, etc. But because we know that we're pulling the last available data from the night before, we're assured that the data that we are sharing is of the best quality that we have. We've also been doing work on developing some tools. So this is, if top left, we have a lot of LiDAR data. We have LiDAR data available, but we required people to find it, download it and do something with it. We spent a little bit of money and we've developed some tools. So we bring the LiDAR data in and we can begin to get intelligence. So we've taken away the mundane processing of the raw data and presented a product to our teams that they will use to find out more and to get the data that they need from the LiDAR surveys. So one of our major findings when I think about the asset data is we discovered that our suppliers were unaware of the data that we needed. So data would come across in O&M manuals and health and safety manuals. Our asset teams would spend many hours trying to find the relevant data, enter it into a system, and in some cases we'd have to go out and resurvey the asset because we just didn't have the information. And as a result, only key information tended to be uploaded into our AIM system. So we've had an ongoing data quality issue. So part of the actions to support that was by creating a data requirements library. This is an online portal. So if you go to Google and tap in Environment Agency DRL, you will come to the Data Requirements Library. And this is where we describe our assets, we describe their elements, we describe their uniclass code, and we indicate the fields that are mandatory, and we indicate at which stage gate we require them. Now, at the moment, we've got stage 1, but we see the Data Requirements Library as being something that will grow over time. It will include different data fields as our data requirements expand. What we've also been doing is, within our internal business, is looking at ensuring that as we develop new IT, we're talking the same language. And this has, again, it's one of those light bulb moments. Often IT systems are developed in isolation. They have a particular purpose. And if I take one example, our cost and carbon tool described assets in a slightly different way to our asset management systems. Fine for perhaps that purpose, but when we started needing to combine that data, it became an apples and pears situation. So we've used the opportunity of an upgrade to align, and that has led to some changes, and it is challenging. I can only describe it as quite challenging, trying to get a compromise for disciplines, and there also has to be the recognition that not all data will sit in the IT system, but when we bring it back together, we need to know how it fits together. So that's a sort of key component of this. Another key aspect was we didn't have any CAD and object standards. So when our suppliers were pulling together our designs, they didn't talk the same language. So we embarked on developing our own. And with that, we developed an object standard, which includes a feature called data cards. And the data cards can automate to the Data Requirements Library and pull across the data requirements for a particular asset type. So as the design is progressing, those fields can either be, some of them can be automated, or they are there very visible in terms of knowing what actually needs to be generated. We're very open about sharing our information. We have a YouTube site, and I'm sure this presentation is going to be shared afterwards, where we have a combination of short intro videos. We have training. We also have some case studies of which have been accrued over the years of activities that we've been doing, and we're currently at over 7,000 hits, which is really quite amazing. And some of the videos are really well received because they help people understand the journey that we're on, and we very much link. We try to tell the story, so they link to other activities within the business. Now, one of the key sort of products as well, when you start thinking about how we can share data and information, has been our data services platform. So for quite a few years, we were sharing asset data, but we've really put a focus on how can we share asset data in a way that it can be consumed, particularly by machines, but also in the same way as within our internal data, ensure that wherever people go, they're seeing the same version of the truth. And so we have, via gov.uk, we have sort of standard ways of accessing data sets, but we also have our open data portal, which utilises sort of linked data approach. And we've had a staggering amount of users. In 2020, we had over 1.5 million visits to the site, the map that you can see on the screen. And we also had just under 500,000 API calls during that time. So, it demonstrates that our data is of interest to other people. And the more that we can invest in making our data usable and accessible, the less people need to come to us to ask for that information. But more than that, we're allowing other people to build their capability, particularly, you know, in the construction and asset management world. And as I described earlier, you know, things like local planning, if we're sharing this information, people can then use that, link in and use their own technologies to connect. And for me, that is, you know, part of supporting the digital world, you know, making data accessible, making it usable. It will encourage other people to improve their digital skills. So what are we doing next? So one of the sort of key aspects, and this is very much in our sort of field of how can we get that data defined, how can we get it right at source, something called supplier asset classification, where through the detailed design phase, we engage between our designers and our team to check that the assets that they have identified are the right ones, and we undertake those checks and balances at the stage, so that the data, when we actually bring it across, we know that it is the right data. We've done the legwork in knowing that it will be acceptable to our asset teams. So one of the other aspects that we've been really working on over the last couple of years, and it's very much in the EIR world, is looking at, so using the CAD and object standards, the data requirements library, and that subsequently informs the outputs that our suppliers generate. They then publish it into the A-site, into our common data environment, and we can then start to consume the structured data, and we can start to use it. And the next slide will cover that a little bit further. But this is, you know, very much where we're moving towards. It is a moving feast. We are taking baby steps because this is a significant development over where we've been before. And it's going to take time to make those changes and ensure that we've got the processes working as they should be. So how do we go about doing it? So focusing very much on the sort of managed flow of assured data and linked classified. So we've spent time, as I described a little bit earlier, making sure that we're having the right data, metadata that allows us to connect. We are procuring that information, so it's a fundamental part of our contracts and our standards. The information is pulled across into the common data environment, and we've so far written, I think, 112 rules. So we're building an independent automated rules assurance. So as that data is coming across, we are checking the data. If it's okay, we accept it and it goes into the structured data store. If it's not, if it's rejected, it then is returned to the supplier to ensure that the data, to make the relevant corrections. Obviously, we inform them what needs to be corrected, but you know, again, this is a very much a new way of working. We are calling on a number of areas for those rules. As you can see there, it is not, you know, we are using a number of sort of processes to build those rules, and those rules will develop and change over time. So it is very much our starting place, because as an organisation, we recognise that, you know, the majority of our data is generated by third parties. So if we don't look at how we can get the data right at source, we will always have a data quality legacy problem. So, you know, the world of digital is giving us the technology to do these things. We now need to look at how we now need to get delivering and using those technologies more effectively. So we are, you know, it's just outlining really the aspects. And you know, I think this is for anyone in our situation, being a client organization, you know, really getting under the hood of, you know, how you can get data right at source. Think about that initial diagram that I showed you, that left hand side, you know, defining it, standardizing it, so that we can do the exciting things with it. Often referred to as a sort of the boring bits, but I think if we don't focus on the boring bits, actually we can't do the exciting things with confidence. And for me, that's one of the main outcomes that I wish to achieve, is that we have confidence in the data that we make our decisions on. So now one of the opportunities of the rules is that we begin to be able to check engineering standards. And this, again, as a business, has caused some sort of brain stretching. How do you start validating engineering standards? So this is a work in progress, but what we are finding is that we have to think about how we can absolutely test it. So if I think about a slope of an embankment, for an example, we can say, well, okay, we'll measure that slope. Does it meet our standard or not? But that doesn't give us assured data. It just says that something matches with the slope. So we're looking at how we can sort of measure the change between the top and the bottom of the embankment to then measure the slope. So we're looking at it from a truly validated way of measuring. So as we move forward, again, technology allows us to do a lot of smart things. So but we need the data. So we've started on that journey. We're very much in that journey of improving the content and the availability of information, being able to view particularly 3D models, being able to link and associate data with those in a way that it's not within it's using perhaps technology, it's combining technology rather than perhaps looking at a particular solution. Very keen on making sure that we maximize the use of technology available today, but also open ourselves up to be capable of using technology that is available tomorrow. So one of the other aspects that we are delivering is smart objects. So this is where we develop what is effectively a sort of pre-packaged designed asset. Because we see many advantages for us, we deliver sort of many similar assets, but we're very clear that we don't want to take design responsibility. So we're using the data requirements library, sort of standardizing the content, putting in some cases parametric aspects to them, so that we can very quickly use the design tools that allow us to very quickly assess whether a particular asset type will work. And if we can associate things like carbon and cost data, we can more quickly assess whether this, at least at a broad brush, what are the most carbon efficient options for us. One of the, and I don't expect anyone to be able to read the bottom Sankey diagram, but one of the BIM deliverables is called an organizational information requirements. And I think it's fair to say it's really quite challenging to get your head around it. It was for me in particular. But as we're maturing on this journey, we're getting a better understanding of how we go about this. And in effect, it's about understanding, it's mapping, it's providing that line of sight between the strategic objectives and the data on the ground. Now, we're going through the process, and one of the main outcomes that we have found is that actually we do have data gaps. And I think this is where the advantage of taking this approach is it does have benefit, because we often use the data we already have in our estate. We don't always think about the data we need to meet those, to demonstrate and meet those corporate objectives, at least not fully. Yeah, absolutely, we have some, but when you start looking at it in more detail, it's how we can bottom out that data. The OIR is an approach that we will be strengthening and using more as really the starter for really understanding the business questions we need to be answering, and the data sources that we need to have at our hand to deliver that. Another key part is ISO 19650, which is around security. And I think what is interesting for this is it's not cybersecurity in its sort of wider context. It's very much focusing on the security of data. So again, if you're not aware of it, I think it's a very good way of sort of understanding perhaps some of the context, particularly if you're procuring data, how that data can be secured, the controls that you need to have in place to secure that data, particularly when sharing, particularly when using models, and how we need to be managing that data differently without going back to I'd say traditional methods of perhaps sending it on a hard drive. How can we utilize digital ways of delivering the data, but ensuring the security protocols are achieved. So really sort of beginning to wrap up now, we are very much focused on that data we need, checking that it's assured and we can trust it. And by doing that, we can begin to reduce the mundane tasks of data processing. We can deliver improved efficiency. We can give people the right information at the right time, and we can keep our stakeholders informed. And as I described earlier, our stakeholders are wide and far. So the more that we can focus on getting data that we can trust, so that data can be trusted by others, and actually we begin to deliver a digital organization. I thought it might be worth mentioning some other activities, because we all know that there are big challenges, but you can't do this alone. And I thought I would just share with you the what's called the BIM Interoperability Expert Group, which across the government client base, we recognise that interoperability is a real problem. So what could we do? So we invited, I think it's like 22 sort of experts from around both so the IT, data side of the business, and really to try and help unpick what they saw as really the key problems. And the key findings were, as you can see on the screen, BASE is continues to fund supporting that. So, expect to see some improvements in this area and some guidance on how we can overcome those, and some of the approaches that I have shared are very much in line with the intention of the interoperability. Briefly mentioned the ISO 19650, but they are a suite of standards, international suite of standards that are very much aimed at the data and information management within collaborative construction projects and in asset management, and particularly in relation to how the data is moved into the asset management field. And Julia and I are very much involved in the ISO 55000 in an international working group, which is looking at how we can sort of strengthen data and information approach to asset management, using some of the experience we've had and combining and joining together some of the standards that exist, so that we deliver a more coherent picture and we create that interoperability between the many life cycles of an asset. So I think that's it. And thank you very much for your time. And I think now we've got some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That's excellent, very informative. There's a lot of detail there that people can pick up on, I think, going through. As mentioned before, if you can type your questions in the chat, we'll pose those to Karen shortly. What I wanted to do now is just briefly hand over to Matt, who's been doing some of the visuals, just to let him just give us a quick visual representation of what he thinks Karen's covered so far. So Matt, do you want to just quickly share your screen and we can get that up and let everyone see before we then move into the Q&A?
Thank you, Julian. I think it will be spotlighted by background, but just to go from the top, where Karen introduced the Environment Agency and some of its roles, its dual roles in asset management and water management particularly, the context in which everyone's working now, which is extremely challenging. Lovely observation. The Environment Agency can seem invisible, but we are everywhere. That's a paraphrase, but it's pretty much it. And then the legacy challenges that Karen walked through, fragmentation really of sources and the trust challenge that developed. And then the story of the 10-year journey, some contextual information and an insight around technology comes and goes, IT particularly, and but data is persistent, which is a nice observation. All the traditional challenges that people in public sector would be very familiar with, vendor lock-in, proprietary formats, and how this affects assets. And a key point about physical asset and digital record, and then into practical things around building information management systems, some of the key things that you need to do. And again, these are circular, so forgive me scribbling over the top, won't be here later. Digital file naming, not possible without outreach, collaboration, and open standards, which take a lot of negotiation. One of the key ones was EIR, Employers Information Requirements, and common language. So incautious joke alert, all right, Gov. Just some context around the EA and what it is or isn't, and the problems of fragmentation that came up right from the start. Common documents, metadata, the standard, which enables integration, interoperability, daily updates, different ways of displaying the same information, all based on the granular local data that's aggregated, and then display the way you talk about things and share them. LIDA got a mention, and the external services success based on open standards, and the more ambitious stuff coming around assured data and information pipelines with suppliers and external agencies. I think that's what I got. Apologies, Karen.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. It shows the power of visual thinking there. So as mentioned before, so thank you, Matt. We will be sharing that graphic later with people as and when it's completed, plus the Q&A one. I've already got a few questions that have come through in the chat section. First one really was one that came from Glenn, and I'd already got something similar in my head to ask around that, was really in terms of, you mentioned there about trying to move away from a technology-focused view to a data-focused view, because the data is going to last a long time, one of my mantras for a long period of time. So both, I think from my perspective, interested to know how you sold that to the wider organization, and Glenn wanted to know about any recommendations you might offer about how you can actually sort of get the organization doing this to minimize the technology dependencies.
I think we had I think it sort of came from two ways really. The implementing BIM as it was gave us, as an organization, gave us a focus and a way of working out how to do data, which I think was enormously useful, because it started us on that train. We also have immediate challenges, and everyone had challenges about trying to often answer very, very simple questions that were very difficult to answer, because we had IT systems that were designed for particular purposes, and they were great for that purpose, but they didn't then capture everything. And I think we had a sort of dawning realization we had to do something different. So I almost sort of came along with the answer, and particularly when we had the data requirements library, showing some of the ways that, thinking about the metadata, being able to push the documents to our easy map, for an example, began to show the power. If we stood back and looked at the connections between our IT, standardizing it, in a way that we could use openly available technologies, then it became quite appealing to people. And it took, probably from my perspective as well, you know, we spent quite a bit of time trying to wheedle thoughts into people's minds about why we have the problems that we have. And, you know, so, but I think, you know, we did spend a lot of time doing our homework. We did it for a particular purpose, but actually that purpose then has informed the rest of the wider asset management business.
So it sounds like it's very much about taking that longer term view and taking a measure. I'm not looking for that quick hit fix that might be there. And I think it leads into a question from Phil Bryan about things like classifications of asset type, of how stable have they been? Or have you found that you've had to go back and rework things as time has gone on and you've learned more about what the requirements are?
We started, so when we first launched the data requirements library, actually we did have quite a good document that described our assets, in fairness, but we'd humanized them. So we had sort of a high level categories, which were really, which we have since now called categories. So we've promoted what we would have called sub assets to asset level. To create that clarity. So and the other challenge that we had is we had the same elements described in, so the same physical thing. I'll take steps for an example. So in our coastal assets, we described it as a sub asset, but in our fluvial, we described it as an element. Fine for humans because they don't worry about things working behind the background, but not good for machines. So we've had to spend some time in cleaning up. But in that cleanup, we take the view of, particularly from a data requirements library, is what are the allowable elements? Because there will be elements that are applicable to more than one asset. And we govern that. So we have a sort of governance board, and what we're trying to do is ensure that information is only, you know, we only describe something once, but we apply it to wherever it needs to be applied, and actually we have definitions that allow us to do that. Now, have we got it absolutely right? I'm 100% certain we haven't. Are we moving? You know, we're and actually what we're finding is the community are beginning to think in those terms as well. So, you know, we're applying very logical approach. You know, we are open to change, but we're open to change around the rules that we have. So we can you know, extend elements to different asset types where they are, you know, they are right to be. But it is about having that sort of firm recipe that you then add to the different assets.
Yeah, and interesting you mentioned there about the community there. So do you think that over time it's gone from you trying to drive the community to be more data enabled to then maybe now being a bit more enlightened and starting to drive you? Is it how receptive are they?
Yes, I think it has been quite interesting because many people are seeing the benefit, because I think, you know, many of the people that we engage with are the ones that were responsible on a Friday trying to generate something that didn't make sense, you know, trying to process data that they, or have data that they, you know, they couldn't make sense of. So I think what we're talking to an audience of people that say, actually, you know, this is beginning to solve our problems, and being able, and it's also having in mind the different business questions that need to be asked. So an asset manager will be concerned, you know, about that, you know, local engineer will be concerned about their asset. Yeah. As a larger organization, we have to answer questions like, you know, how many trash screens have you got around the country? How many pumps have you got around the country? And if we don't quite get that right, it can quite influence not it can influence at CEO, it can influence at government level. And I think particularly with the significant floods that we've had in more recent, probably over the last 20 years, we've recognized the challenges of not having that data. So our approach is very much how making sure that the data is fit for all purposes, and working through some of those how would we type scenarios, so we avoid having something that is extremely specialist and just focused on one area, one particular use case, but actually enables us to have data that is fit for all those purposes.
Yeah. There's also a question from where we're gone. It's quite a good question there about sources of information. So yes, from George Rory, interested in understanding about the development of open data standards, and sort of wanted to understand a bit more about which industry bodies and forums have you found useful, and what the learning have been from that.
Yes. So I mean, we've worked very closely with Building Smart over time, particularly with the development of IFC and COBE. I think what sort of a learning point from me is you've got to be involved. So there's no point in just saying this doesn't work for me, I'll try something else. So for instance, MBS and the Uniclass classification, it hardly had any flood risk management assets. But we have worked with MBS to develop those. So I think you've got to be proactive in supporting the development, be open to accepting perhaps what others, say community might have a view on things, but you've got to be in it to win it. So work with them, contribute to the forums, join things like Building Smart, get involved in developing IFC, for an example, when it doesn't fit your needs, and actually be involved in the forums that put your head above the parapet and say these, contribute is what I would say.
Yeah, and I guess in the UK, particularly the UK BIM Alliance is a good place to get involved. Yes. So that means any party who's involved in the built environment, they can get involved both in terms of to listen, to find out what's happening, but also to help develop some of the guidance that people are using. Question from Rob S. So he's interested in terms of your data team and sort of how many people you've got in your team, and is the data maintained in-house? And I kind of add on to that is, do you see the team being more like having a little hard boundary around them, or actually are you at the center of a data community that's including everybody?
Yes, and that's a good question. At the moment, I've got quite a small team, and we are doing, so a lot of the developments we manage as projects as things stand at the moment. We are so some of what we do have, and I guess this is where we're we're sort of in that sort of throes of change, is we tend to have, our communities tend to be quite orientated toward around IT systems. So trying to bring those people on board, but also discover who within the business is really interested and excited in these areas, to build that community. And actually I had something from one of my teams today, so actually people are really excited, particularly about what we're delivering now, and it's harnessing that excitement. And I think as well, we are very open, we are very approachable, we encourage people to get in contact and work within. So I work alongside my colleagues that support the IT systems, and I don't. So we work in tandem. So I very much own the data in their systems, and my colleague sort of manages the day-to-day operations. So I would say in answer, we're getting there. We're not necessarily there yet.
Yeah, and it's probably an interesting one there to explore about the ownership of the data, because you say you own it. do other people in the organisation understand that they either own it or that they've got their own responsibilities, or do they all point fingers at you saying, "Come on, Karen, when are you going to fix this for us?"
I think a little bit of both. We've taken, the move to separating the data from the IT systems has been something that has happened more recently, probably in the last year or so. So, it is a relatively new move, and my role is, looking at, how we, let's say, the sort of more general data quality, how we can maximise benefit. I don't get so involved in perhaps some of the reporting, sort of the business reporting side of things. I'm all about making sure that the data is right at source, so we can trust the outputs. And again, it's a moving feast, and it's changing perhaps the way that we have done things in the past.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Karen. That's been excellent. So we've run slightly over on time. So I'd just like to thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for the engaging answers you've given to the questions we've thrown at you. Just a quick reminder to everyone, the code of the workshop is BCS Data. The recording of the event will be on the BCS member group's YouTube channel, and that will probably take a week before it's processed and appears on there. But if you haven't booked in already, you can still book for the remaining events this week. And I think if you enjoyed this session this morning, then this afternoon's one with Mark Enzer will also be particularly of interest to you. So thank you to all, and I hope to see you again in one of our events in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.